Okay, so this morning I'm going to start a new mini series, and by mini I mean like this week and next week. I do this every year. First 2 Sundays of the year, I spend a few minutes talking about who we are, what we're about, the sanctuary, our message, our mission, our ministry, all that stuff. It's kind of a state of the union. It's a good recalibration, a reminder of what we're about, why we exist, those sorts of things. And so this morning, I want to focus your attention on one verse, Romans chapter 5, verse 20. Romans chapter 5, verse 20, I'm going to be reading from the Message. I love the way the Message puts this verse. It says this: all that passing laws against sin did was produce more lawbreakers. But sin didn't and doesn't have a chance in competition with the aggressive forgiveness we call grace. When it's sin versus grace, grace wins hands down. You know, in a world where performance is everything, grace is rebellious. In fact, I would go so far as to say that grace is defiant. It defies the rigid metrics of success. Everything else in this world is about proving ourselves, proving that we are worthy of love, proving that we are worthy of respect, proving that we are worthy of attention. If you want love, you have to become lovable. If you want respect, you have to become respectable. If you want attention, you have to do something or become someone that impresses people. It can be exhausting. Grace is the opposite of this. Grace has nothing to do with earning or deservedness. In fact, it's opposed to what is owed. It's a liberating contradiction between what we deserve and what we get. So, in that sense, grace is the ultimate rebellion in a world of suffocating performancism. Grace is punk rock all the way. The world is cold, but grace is warm. The world is hard. Grace is soft. The world points fingers. Grace gives hugs. The world judges and cancels people. Grace forgives. The world doesn't forget your sins, but grace doesn't remember them. The world is heavy. Grace is light. I was, as I mentioned, sick and had a lot of downtime the last 2 weeks, in addition to the fact that my wife was out of town in Texas for the last 10 days or so. She got back late Friday night. And when I have that much downtime, especially when I'm predominantly by myself, I tend to get in my own head about things. I ponder, I think. Sometimes I overthink. And as a result, I tend to get anxious. One of the things that I get anxious about, and I've shared this before, is struggling sometimes with what I do professionally. I know it looks like I'm always up here having a great time. The struggle is real, though, and oftentimes hidden. Maybe I've just reached an age where I can't help but wonder if I should have spent my life doing something else. I don't know, but I struggle with it. Sometimes I'd rather be doing anything but this, to be honest with you. Something that didn't demand so much mental and emotional energy. And the tough part for me is that I remember a time when none of this felt like work. When I would pinch myself because I couldn't believe that I got to spend my life doing something I love to do, something I was built to do. And now, sometimes, I don't love it. Sometimes I wish I could do something else. Sometimes I wish I could do anything else. So I hereby tender my resignation. Just kidding. Just kidding. You guys are stuck with me. So I asked myself while I was pondering, overthinking, and working myself into a frenzy of anxiety. I asked myself, why do I do this? And I wrote down four things that I found helpful to process and to put down on paper. Number one, I do it because I can't not do it. I've tried, trust me, I've tried, and God just won't let me go. Won't let me go. Secondly, I do it because I have a deep sense of responsibility. I mean, the things that we talk about here are our only hope, our lifeline. Without the truth of God's grace, I'm screwed. We're all screwed. Thirdly, I do it because I love you. I really do. I care about you. Sometimes I wish I didn't, because caring about people can hurt sometimes. But I care about you. I ache when you ache. I feel the things that you feel. I get you. And even though I'm no better than any of you, in fact, I would argue that I'm worse than most of you, I want to help when and where I can. I want my presence in your life to be a reminder of how big God's grace is. And lastly, I do this because I need it to survive, honestly. I need this place. It anchors me. It disciplines me. It keeps me tethered to God in so many ways. If this place wasn't such a prominent part of my life, I'd probably drift, to be honest with you. I mean, God knows what I need. And he knows that I need this place. He knows that I need you. I jokingly but truthfully say that one of the reasons God made me a preacher was to ensure that I would actually go to church. So while the struggle is real and probably won't go away, this is my home. You are my people. And the reason this is my home and the reason you are my people is because grace reigns here. It's what we're about. I've said this before, but I really don't think, and some of you, when I said this before, were gracious enough to argue with me about this, to be honest with you. But I know my heart, and I can honestly say I don't think I'm a better person, whatever better means anyway, but I don't think I'm a better person than I was 10 years ago when I hit bottom. But I am more aware of my screwed upness and my need for grace. And I suppose from a certain standpoint, that is better. Increased self-awareness. And I think that's the journey that we're all on. I love that this isn't a place where we're trying to fix each other. Love that. In fact, one of the rules that we have at the Vault when we meet on Thursday nights as we go around the room is we don't counsel one another, we don't advise one another, we don't try to preach to one another, we don't try to fix one another, we don't try to change one another, we just listen and bear one another's burdens. That's why we're here. But I love that this isn't a place where we're trying to fix each other. We don't claim to have all the answers. We're not sniffing out other people's sins, at least not overtly. We're imperfect. We admit it. We know it. We recognize the futility of keeping score and trying to change people. We believe it's God's job to change people, and it's our job to love them, period. That simplifies every relationship we have with every person on planet Earth. We spend so much time and energy trying to change people, fix people, and it's not our job. When we do that, we're operating way above our pay grade. It's God's job to change people. It's our job to love them. And if God chooses to change people, it will be through our love for them, period. I feel safe here, and that is very rare anywhere these days, especially in churches. Churches have historically been the last place I felt safe in. The last place where I could take off my mask and be real. I was fearful of being rejected, judged, assessed, evaluated. I read a quote a couple days ago from a guy that I otherwise really respected. He's a now deceased Lutheran theologian by the name of C.F.W. Walther, and he wrote a bunch of good things. He helped me in a lot of ways as I read his books over the years, but I saw a quote of his yesterday that sent me over the edge. Over the edge. It wasn't yesterday, it was a couple days ago. He said this: the church must practice excommunication without hesitation, even for minor sins, to preserve the purity of the body of Christ. And I thought to myself, thank God that's not what we're about here. I mean, any church like that will be successful in only one thing: teaching people to hide their struggles and to wear masks. I mean, think about that. First of all, the audacity and the arrogance of a statement like that. The church must practice excommunication without hesitation, even for minor sins, to preserve the purity of the body of Christ. Who the hell would be left, honestly? I mean, I literally read that and I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, how delusional is that? That is what we call around here high anthropology, thinking that we are way better than we actually are. I mean, any church like that, like I said, will be successful in only one thing: people hiding their struggles, people hiding their sins, wearing masks, learning how to pretend that they're better than they are. So let me be the first to say that if your marriage is failing or struggling, or if you're in the middle of an affair, or your teenage daughter gets pregnant, or you can't kick a secret addiction, or you're having a crisis of faith, or you get in legal trouble, or you're just struggling with life and loneliness and regret and shame, this is your place. This is your place. We named this place the sanctuary because we want it to be a place where it's safe to be real. I grew up in church, and as I mentioned, it wasn't, to me anyway, a safe place to be real. And I wanted this place to feel a lot different. When Stacy and I moved here, we set out to establish a space for people like us. People with failure on our resume, people with dirt under our fingernails, people who had crashed and burned, who had in one way, shape, or form experienced hardship and suffering and pain. And so we called this place the sanctuary because we want it to be a place where it's safe to be real, a place where it's safe to bring your whole self, not just the best parts of you, but the worst parts of you too. The self that laughs and cries, the self that loves and holds grudges, the self that has good days and bad ones, the self that is greedy and generous, the self that is confident and insecure, the self that is courageous and cowardly. That's all of us. I am a bundle of contradictions, a bundle of contradictions. If you could get a glimpse into my innards, you would see very quickly and very easily that I am just a mixture of contradictions. I believe we all are, all of us. I mean, I don't know about you, actually I do, but I'm not going to assume. But speaking for myself, I tell the truth and I lie. I live out in the open and I hide. I give and I take. I'm self-controlled and I'm reckless. I have an enormous capacity to be faithful to those I love and an enormous capacity to hurt them with all forms of infidelity. My history proves that. I know what I'm capable of. And this is the only place where I feel safe enough to admit that stuff. I don't feel safe admitting that stuff around religious people. I don't. They wouldn't accept me if I admitted that stuff. This is the only place where I feel safe enough to admit that stuff. And it's because we have one message, one bullet in our chamber: grace. As I've said before, it is not my job to stand up here and say 10,000 different things. It's my job to stand up here week after week and say one thing 10,000 different ways. We are a one message ministry, period. We have one word that defines our mission, namely grace. And I've said, I've gotten criticized for this over the years because I've been saying this stuff for a long time, and I've been criticized for this over the years, and people will try to say things to me like, well, that's not the whole truth. That's only part of the truth. When you're talking about Christianity, for example, there are a lot of other things that need to be talked about. And they talk about grace as if it is one spoke in the wheel, that it's one of many parts, but it's not. It's the hub of the wheel. It's everything. In fact, it defines and distinguishes Christianity from every other world religion or approach to life. Every other world religion or approach to life is about you climbing, you ascending, you saving yourself, freeing yourself by what you do and by who you can become and whatnot. Christianity is unique in that regard. It's not about our ascent, it's about God's descent. It's not about our devotion and our commitment and our faithfulness. It's about God's devotion and God's commitment and God's faithfulness to us. It's not about our love for Him. It's about His love for us. It's not about our performance for Him. It's about His performance for us. It's grace, always and only grace. And when a pack of people believe in grace together, it creates a very special kind of atmosphere. The good news of God's grace beautifies how we treat one another. How we treat one another reveals what we really believe about God as opposed to what we say we believe. So, I've said this before, but what kind of person should you be to someone who has fallen down? And the answer is the kind of person you will run to when you fall down. When we operate with a high anthropology, expecting people and ourselves to be better than we are, then when people crash and burn and fail and struggle, we look down on them because we assume they should be better than they are. They should be further along than they are. We lack empathy when we maintain that posture. But when we can honestly say, like the Apostle Paul did, I'm the worst guy that I know. My friend Jean LaRue says, if you're not the worst person you know, you don't know yourself very well. And until you can actually be able to admit and believe, I'm the worst person I know, then you won't be empathetic. You'll tend to be judgmental, self-righteous, thinking that you're further along. But grace doesn't allow for that, in a sense. It's not a culture marked by bitterness and scheming and skepticism and judgmentalism and agendas and distrust. Grace creates a culture marked by compassion, not competition. Grace creates a culture marked by deference, not preference. Grace creates a culture marked by reconciliation, not resentment. By unity, not division. By forgiveness, not grudge holding. The truth of grace creates a culture of grace, an atmosphere of grace. It's a culture marked by love and not legalism, by relationships, not rules. Grace changes things, changes everything. It changes relationships. It changes dynamics. It changes your approach to work. It changes priorities. It changes perspectives. It changes the way we view other people. It changes the way we view ourselves. It changes the way we view God. Grace makes a place safe to admit your faults, safe to admit your fears, safe to admit your secrets and your failures and your doubts and your frustrations. Columnist Peter Weiner put it like this, and I love this, and I think he describes well what the sanctuary is about. He said, if you find yourself in the company of people whose hearts have been captured by grace, count yourself lucky. I count myself lucky. They love us despite our messy lives. They stay connected to us through our struggles, always holding out the hope of redemption. You don't see hard edges and dogmatism and self-righteous judgment from gracious people. There's a tenderness about them that opens doors that had previously been bolted shut. People who have been transformed by grace have a special place in their hearts for those living in the shadows of society. They're easily moved by stories of suffering, and they step into the breach to heal. I think that's true of this place. I mean, we're broken down people, and we judge one another, and we assess, and we evaluate, and we struggle with our own forms of self-righteousness. That's not going away. We're not better than anybody else. But we're willing to admit that, and I think that's the difference. I think the difference is that we recognize our propensity toward those things, toward those destructive things. We admit that we fall short. We admit that we hurt others. We admit that we judge others. And I think that's what a culture of grace produces. It produces a safe place to admit the worst parts of yourself. It creates a safe environment for you to tell the truth about yourself. And not just put your best foot forward and to wear your most polished masks, but instead to take the masks off, to be real, to give voice to your struggle, to talk about your insecurities, to talk about the things that have hurt you, the people that have hurt you, to talk about the resentments that continue to weigh you down, the lack of forgiveness, all that stuff. This is a recovery place masquerading as a church. That's what this is. This is a rehabilitation center. That's what we are. And we are that, honestly, selfishly, because I need that. It's what I need. I didn't come here to start a place that you need. I came here to start a place that I need, hoping that my needs were no different than a lot of other people's needs. And that's the truth of the matter. We may all be unique, but we're all very similar. We're all human beings that struggle with a lot of the same stuff. It may flesh itself out in different ways, but our fallenness, our brokenness is real. And while it may express itself in different ways, it expresses itself. I've said before that people are much more likely to be honest if it's clear that there's forgiveness and grace on the horizon rather than judgment. If there's a fear that there is judgment, you won't be honest. You won't talk honestly about the things in your life that aren't going well, the things that seem to be falling apart. But people are much more likely to be honest if it's clear that there's forgiveness and grace on the horizon. When you know that there is grace and understanding and empathy and mercy and forgiveness on the horizon, it invites honesty. It invites realism about who you are, about what you need, about what your struggles may be. I want to read something that I wrote about maybe 2 weeks ago or so. I was thinking about these things, and when I'm thinking, I write. In fact, writing helps me figure out what I think most of the time. But I wrote this. The church wasn't established to be some fluffy, idealistic club made up of good people who are getting better. No, it was designed by its founder to be a battleground for hope, a gritty place where we fight for each other against the shame that houndingly reminds us of our many sins and failures. We carry wounds, all of us, some self-inflicted, some thrust on us by a brutal world that doesn't care how much we bleed. And those wounds leave us disillusioned, ashamed, scared, and often too tired to pretend that we're okay. But real community, it doesn't flinch. It doesn't slap a Band-Aid on a bullet wound or demand the mask of fine. Instead, it steps into the wreckage with us. It's raw, it's unfiltered, it's painfully real. Here, we lay our brokenness on the table. No pretenses, no hiding. We show our scars. We let ourselves fall apart, and we hold each other together when everything feels like it's crumbling. And somehow, in the middle of all that messiness, we stumble into something sacred: grace. Not the grace that glosses over pain, but the kind that costs something. Grace that bleeds, grace that fights, grace that stays when it's easier to leave. This is where we remind each other of the truth that shame drowns out. Grace isn't earned by good behavior. It's a lifeline thrown to those gasping for air. And together, we call out the lies that tell us we're too far gone, too broken, too failed. And in their place, we amplify the voice that says, you are loved as you are, no conditions, no matter what. But it's not all heavy. We laugh, thank God. I've said before, that is one mark of a culture of grace, is that we can laugh. We don't take ourselves too seriously. We laugh sometimes because we have to, because joy is the rebellion that hope demands. We shoulder each other's burdens when they're too crushing to carry alone. We show up, bruised and battle-worn, ready to help those tempted to throw in the towel. Yes, Christian community is messy, it's imperfect, it's full of jagged edges and raw pain. But in its honesty, it's a place where healing becomes possible, where grace does its deepest work, and where hope refuses to die. That's the way it's supposed to be anyway. And I think that's the way the sanctuary is. I believe that. I think what I wrote and what I described is what God would want for every church, to be honest with you. For every form of human community, I think that's what God desires, that's what God wants. But all too often, it's not. Religious communities especially tend to be the scariest places for fallen people to fall down and broken people to break things, when they should be the safest places. Because they should be the places that talk about and believe in grace more than anything else, more than any other kind of place. All too often, they're not. So what I described and what I wrote about is the way things are supposed to be. And when you can find, or if you can find, a glimpse of a community like that in this broken world, you have found a little bit of heaven on earth. You have found something worth dying for. You have found something worth holding on to. I believe this place is that kind of place. I do. If it wasn't, I'd be out of here. Out. I mean, the minute this place starts to become a place of overarching opinions about what people want, and I don't like this song, and I don't like that song, and why does the pastor have so many tattoos, and blah, 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 blah. As soon as this becomes that, first of all, if that's the way you are, you're not going to like it here, okay? I mean, I am, for the most part, a gracious guy, but when I feel that kind of toxicity seep into this place, you will see a side of me that maybe you don't ever want to see again, trust me. But I'm so grateful that this isn't that kind of a place. Like I said, if it was, I'd be out of here. I've been a part of places like that. Places where people complain about the stupidest stuff, all because they like something better. I mean, I literally have heard people come to me at different times, not here, thank God, come to me at different times and moan and groan and complain about songs that are sung. I don't like that song. Why don't we sing these kinds of songs? And I'm like, did you see that guy in the back who was losing it while we were singing that song? Who God was meeting when we were, you may not like it, who cares? It's not about what you like. It's not about our preferences around here. It's about deference. It's about love. It's about mercy and grace. And I'm glad. I mean, we've dealt with our, complaints around here over the years from time to time. But I'm quick to remind people that the amount of complaining that goes on in this place is minuscule compared to the amount of complaining I've experienced in other places. And we're just, we're selfish people, so we're going to complain. When we don't like something, we'll probably say it, and if we don't say it, we'll keep it inside and maybe begin to justify the resentment that starts to form. I mean, we're those kinds of people. I get it, okay? We're sinners, selfish people, far worse than we think we are in that regard. I get it. But the fact that we know that we're willing to admit that, keeps that stuff from controlling this place. When we go, you know what, I'm an ass, I'm sorry. I mean, I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have done that. I'm selfish. I'm thinking about myself. My insecurities are driving this disposition towards you, blah, blah, blah. My grandmother used to say that every good relationship is made up of two good forgivers. She's right. That's true. And I think this is that kind of a place, and we will, with all of the might that God gives me and the leadership here, we will continue to fight for this place to be that kind of space for me, for you, for all of us. It's the way it's supposed to be. It's the way the sanctuary is. And like I said, if it wasn't, I'd be out of here. Exit stage left.